Today on the show, we're going to be doing a water pump removal and replacement in LFX 3.6. Now, this is on a Saturn Vue 2008, but even on the Suzuki XR7 or Weirdo 7 something or other numbers, and your GMC Terrain, Chevy Equinoxes with the 3.6, this is going to be the same procedure. I'm going to show you how to remove the water pump. And this video is probably for the amateur / novice. It's kind of a drawn out video. But I'm going to explain to you not only how to replace this, but I'm going to explain to you why it's leaking, what's leaking, and all the steps and procedures from it. Most importantly from this video, I'm going to show you how to diagnose it properly. That's a big deal because you might be replacing it for no reason. Like I might have been replacing it for no reason because it could have been something else. So if you follow these steps, you're going to be good to go. I promise you, you will be able to fix it. So we've got a 2008 Saturn Vue, which is going to be the same as the 2009. And no, I shouldn't be making videos about 2-year-only automobiles. But the good thing about this one is to cover a lot of different types of vehicles. So if yours don't look identical to this, I promise you, it's going to be very, very similar. For the Chevy Equinox with the 3.0 and 3.6. And the GMC Terrain with the 3.0 and the 3.6. So it's going to be the same procedure, and I'm going to show you through the steps how they're the same because I just happen to have one. Actually, I have both of them. So anyways, we're going to show you how to do this as simple as possible and as easy as possible. So let's get going on with this show. To diagnose this properly, we're going to need a coolant system pressurizing thing. Now, you can rent this just about anywhere. They make two different versions of this. This version is really hard to use, but I used them for a decade before I got this version, which allows me to pump in shop air into the system and leave air pressure to it. So if there's a leak, I can look around the vehicle to see the leak. Now, when you get your coolant system pressurizer, there's going to be two different types of fittings that will fit onto this right here. And this is the wrong one. This is the right one. The difference is this one plugs off that overflow hose, whereas in this one doesn't. If you use this one right here, it's just going to allow air to escape out of there, and you're not going to be able to pressurize the system very well. I made that mistake when I was doing it. So keep in mind that you need to block that off so it pressurizes the system completely. And we all know there shouldn't be any air leaking whatsoever, but it appears that I might have some faulty components here because they're kind of old, but it doesn't matter. If I can put 40 pounds of air pressure in this thing, if there's a leak, it's going to leak. If I can put 90 pounds in there, if it's going to leak, there's going to leak. So it doesn't matter if it leaks up here a little bit. We'll find the leak, or at least I hope we do. All right, so we need to unhook this engine, and the way this is supposed to work is you're supposed to be able to just knock that thing over. Of course, I can't do it. So we need to disconnect this battery. So we'll slide that thing off of there and leave it hooked up. Push down on this thing right here. Lift up on that thing right there. Pull up on this thing right here. Unhook this thing right here. Nip that out of there. Brand new battery. And this 10mm nut up right here. Now, when you folks go back to putting on your battery cables, only snug them up, like 10 pounds maybe. You over-tighten them, they're not going to fit on these posts. And believe it or not, the positive and negative post are different sizes and diameters. It's really unnecessary to disconnect that for just replacing the motor mount, but if you're doing like an alternator or water pump, you won't too. All of these covers on these LFX engines are just held on by little rubber bushies and posts up. First thing we're going to do is pop this tab back. Christian, you can start taking them things out of there. Try not to pull it out all the way. If you do, pull it, push down on this tab. If it won't release, push it as far forward as you can, quickly snap it back. If I remember correctly, there were 4 screws holding down this airbox cover. We've got 3 little rubber tangs holding down the airbox. These are just rubber studs up here. You've got 2 10mm bolts back there. Now we're going to take a block of wood and we're going to set it right up underneath here. and just apply pressure to the bottom of the engine till the vehicle starts to lift a little bit. Then using a 15 millimeter, we're going to remove these 3 bolts here and an 18 millimeter to remove them 2 nuts down there to remove the whole motor mount off of there. Getting the motor mount off of this is super, super simple. And as long as you have the jack underneath there, it's not going anywhere. Now we need to remove the upper crossover engine mount bracket here. 1, 2, 3 bolts and get that out of our way so we don't have to work around it. Now I just quite simply jacked the motor up until the vehicle started lifting up off the ground, and I've got access to just about everything I need to. Now that bar will simply get out of your way and you can gain access to your water pump or your alternator if that's what you're working on. I'm personally using this portion on my alternator replacement and my water pump replacement videos. It's fairly obvious that this water pump is defective. Water around here, but what we need to look for is water up above it. Then that would tell us if this is actually the unit that's leaking. But if we want to be absolutely for sure what is leaking, they make tools that you can rent at most auto parts stores. Mine air operated. These pump ones are a real pain in the ass. It's difficult to get them all pumped up full of pressure. They have to be full. So let's set this up correctly. We'll put the right one on there, unlike here I'm about to do in the video. Screw that down. And when you set this on here, I set it on here with the up in the up position. Then I turn it until it stops, and it's going to stop, and then I let it lock. This should be floppy right here if it's locked on there correctly. Then we can apply air pressure to it. So I'm going to turn this on right here, and then I'm going to turn this valve right here, and hopefully we can get enough pressure in there. Start pushing that coolant out, coming out the overflow over there. It shouldn't do that, so I'm going to fix it. Should have thought of that, but used the wrong one originally. Now how this should work is we should turn this air pressure on, pump this up, and then turn this off, and that needle shouldn't really go down at all. Might go down a little bit because it's filling the cavities that are missing coolant with air. Situation, it's definitely leaking. So what we do is we just turn that on, and you can pretty much turn this sucker up. What it does is that fills the system with air and is supposed to push the coolant out the leak, wherever the leak is. But in this situation, I have a little bit of a faulty equipment, so it doesn't really ever start showing a leak. So then I got to use my noggin to figure this out. Now I am going to show you how to take all of this stuff apart up underneath here. I'm just already at this point, and I started making a video because I was doing an alternator and when I found this problem. So I just used my head and figured out how to fix it. Now we need to go to the problem areas of the vehicle and around the chassis and look for them issues. We're looking for coolant and we're listening for air. We're also smelling if there's any coolant leaking too. My videos are not only how to do things, but why you're doing them. They do seem a little bit long, and no, the procedures don't take anywhere near as long as I take to make these videos and show you all these things. But you gotta remember that I'm dealing with people that know some things and people that don't know anything. And I want every single person to be successful. Rely heavily on the fact that if anyone else can do it, you can do it too. Not only fixing the problem, but understanding why it was a problem in the first place is obviously more important than even knowing how to replace a part. We're here and look, listen. You can also look down here. I know there's a stinking leak. Go into the passenger side of the vehicle and we start feeling around and sniffing and listening for noises. If your heater core is leaking, you're definitely going to find it here. I don't know why I don't see it, but I know there is one. I can turn the water pump and see something. You can also grab onto your hoses, wiggle them a little bit, and see if you see any slices or cuts. Radiator hoses. That's not a radiator hose. You know, different things just to see if you can figure out where the leak is, because... So I suppose this is that moment, who the heck I am? Well, my name's Clay with Clayway here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I believe my job here on YouTube is to inspire and empower folks just like you to do things yourself. Keep mechanics like myself out of your coin purse. Nobody wants anybody up in their purse. If you dig the video and you like what I do here, please consider subscribing, clicking the notifications, sharing my videos, giving me them sweet old thumbs up. If you've got an automotive question and it's not baby mama drama related, you can look me up on Facebook under Clay's AC and Auto Repair. I answer questions for absolutely free. I don't know everything, but I try to help people when I can. I hope you enjoy the video, and we're going to be successful. Don't forget, while you're watching this, that if anybody else can do it, you can do it too. That I promise you. Definitely should not go down that quickly, even with that much pressure. Usually I bring it up into the black, but we'll see how well it holds. But that's no Quarto, for sure. With the system pressurized, we also need to check the heater core on the inside of the vehicle. You would be able to hear air, not talking about the air coming out between your ears. You'd be able to hear it in here if it had a leak. And the likelihood of it leaking for quite some time would allow you to just put your hand down on the carpet and feel for moisture on the passenger and the driver's side. The likelihood of you having a heater core leak would have been very easily recognizable by the fact that your windshield would fog up and all of the windows in your car would fog up with moisture. With the very small chance that it could be a head gasket leaking, pull the oil fill cap off, listen inside there. If you hear something, well, that's not a good thing. Trust me. So if we actually have a leaking head gasket, we're going to look through our translucent cooling reservoir and we're going to see bubbles like that. And you're probably going to know there's a problem because the engine's not going to run very well with it leaking like that. We'll do more on that stuff in other videos. And since this vehicle didn't show any signs of that kind of damage, ran good, didn't overheat, blah, 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 I doubt that there's a head gasket problem because it would definitely be like this if there was. So this guy actually had his coolant reservoir way over full, but I do believe he had a actual head gasket leak. So the way this system is supposed to work, this upper hose right here pushes the air back. Isn't that we don't overfill the expansion tank right here, because this is designed to bleed the air off of the system. So in this particular system, we don't have a really bad bleeding procedure. This system actually works pretty good to alleviate that problem. So if you overfill these, the air is not allowed to escape into this chamber right here. With a good system, you won't have any bubbling of air coming up from here. You'll notice the air bubbling if you have a blown head gasket coming up through here all the time, constantly. Usually when you first start these up after you've done a water pump or some serious coolant, you know, change the thermostat or whatever, you will have air coming up because that's the air bleeding out of the system. So even with it running and up to temperature, you would be able to remove the cap easily and not have anything coming up. If you remove the cap, you've left the vehicle running for several minutes and there's constantly bubbling and stuff like that, unfortunately, you probably have a blown head gasket. And you can always pull your dipstick out and see if there's any moisture on it. I'm here to tell you though, just because there's moisture on the tip of the dipstick does not always mean it has a bad head gasket. This particular vehicle was diagnosed with a bad head gasket, but I don't think so. These engines have some problems, but head gaskets generally is not one of them. Even though I can't definitively say for certain that this water pump is leaking, since I'm here and I've already got it taken apart and I've got a brand new one, I'm going to put it in there. This got about 103,000 miles on it, so it's worth doing. I'm already here. I see a bunch of moisture. Might as well eliminate one of the problems, then I don't have to take this back apart again. I could also leave this sitting on here with pressure in it, and eventually I'm going to see something underneath it, which is going to give me an idea of the area and part of the engine that is actually leaking coolant. Normally with one of these coolant pressurizers hooked up, you're going to see coolant leaking immediately. This is strange that I do not in this situation because I know for certain there's a leak. Regretfully today, we don't have the time to look into that, and I just wanted to get this job done because originally I started this to do an alternator. So we're going to get to more things that you can do and start changing this pump. Okay, to loosen these bolts up, they're 10 millimeter. You can take a screwdriver, wedge it in between the bolts to hold them as you loosen each one. Or you can just take a quickie wrench like me, using one hand to hold it and then the other one to loosen the bolts. I highly recommend you start it and kind of slam it onto the bolt, and then it'll come out real quick. Now, we've got a pan underneath it to catch the coolant that's going to fall out. Now, the reason that I'm not removing the coolant out of here is because this is engine block coolant, and no matter what I do, I'm not going to get the engine coolant out of the engine. So the only way to do it is to catch it with a pan. I could have taken the coolant out of the radiator, but that's a waste of time. You don't need to remove all of the coolant from the whole system. You have more likelihood that you're not going to replace it and catch it all and put it back in there, and we want to have as much coolant in there as possible. So we're going to start taking out the bolts that go around there, and if we look at our new water pump, we see there's 6 bolts in it. So we just need to remove these bolts. Probably 10mm fasteners would be my guess. So the best way to get these loose, sometimes these bolts are pretty tight. What I always do is I take the ratchet and I start turning it, and then I push it into my bolt. So it takes it out real quick. You're gonna find that as you use these things, if you just like put it on there, it's not gonna wanna turn. But if you drop it on there as it goes on, it's gonna go in and break that loose. We're gonna check these bolts just to make sure that they're all the same size, and they not really anything proprietary to the location they go in, but you can set them in your new water pump. All right, so we're just gonna loosen the last bolt up. And the reason that we're gonna do that is we don't want a big gush of water coming out. We've already got some coolant coming out now, but we don't want the whole water pump flopping off of there, because if you pull that right off, it's gonna come right out and go all over your tools and stuff that you might have laying down there. All right, so when you look at this, if you see any of this broken, you can kind of see how the old residue from the pump gasket is on there. If you see any of that broken, like right there, that could be where it's leaking from. Same thing goes for this. This does not come with Permatex on it. You do not have to Permatex this gasket. And we can see how this is all worn off, which is the coating that was on the top of here. That's because coolant, especially Dexcool, which is the garbage that this has in it, loves to eat gasket material. I don't know why, but it's what it is. But more than likely, this gasket was just the problem. It really technically probably wasn't even the water pump itself, technically speaking. A paper gasket works just fine. Don't put anything on it. Just make sure that your surfaces are clean really well. Primarily, the surface on here, we're gonna take some Scotch-Brite and we're gonna clean this up and make it really shiny, so when we torque it down properly, it seals up really well. While I had the water pump out, I started looking at these other locations, and it looked like moisture was up in there to me, so I decided that I was going to replace these gaskets as well and clean them up just to ensure I didn't have to take this back apart again. Okay, so if you can't get all that gasket material off, just take a razor blade and clean that stuff off, and then try to do a little bit more with your Scotch-Brite. I'm going to remove these 2 bolts right here and remove this air bolt right here, and pull this back and replace the gasket that goes up in there. There's a couple things that I noticed right here. This gasket's pretty flat. And then if I come and look through there, kind of looks like it could have been washed out right here. I'm not gonna try to Scotch-Brite this part too much. Just a little light stuff there. We're gonna take dielectric. We're gonna get a new gasket for here. Hopefully seal this puppy up. So this broke extremely easy. That's a telltale sign of it being bad, but also there's a little divot in there. Don't skip changing this one either. It's a very good possibility that this leaked, because normally you won't have dirt and grime build up around something that's dry. Now, it could have gotten wet from our pump gasket leaking up there. It was misdiagnosed as a head gasket. Yeah, it's a pretty big misdiagnosis, because when I bought this vehicle, I was told that it had a bad head gasket. So you need to check these things out. Ending up selling something like this to me, potentially leaving thousands of dollars on the table. I want you folks to look at these. These are the part numbers for that upper pipe. I want you to guess which one is more expensive. You know, because I'm asking this one. This was $6. This O-ring was freaking $9. I got these from AutoZone. These people are the most terrible rip-offs on the freaking planet. Stay away from that junk-ass store. Anyways, what I'm going to do, I'm going to measure that O-ring up and just put an O-ring on there, because this is just quite simply an O-ring. It's not even flat, beveled, or anything. This is an O-ring. This is a 12-cent, maybe 3-cent O-ring. Okay, so I got this kit from Harbor Freight for about as much as this O-ring cost. I got all of these, and I think after looking at them, this is the correct size out of this one right here. These come in handy, so I'm gonna try using this one. I've also got some dielectric grease. If you have a hard time getting down inside there, make sure you just take a pick and run it along there and pull out all that grit that you possibly can. I know it's awfully tempting to put Permatex on here, but you don't want to use anything but dielectric. I always put the dielectric on prior to putting the gaskets on. Then that way it squishes out and it keeps it there. I'm telling you, if you torque it down properly, it will not leak. As long as you clean up everything properly as well. Now, whenever you're installing a gasket like this, make sure you push it down. Do not rub your finger across it, because you're going to lengthen the gasket. So you just push it into place, and I'm going to put a little bit of dielectric on there. One thing that we notice is that this O-ring is much higher than it was before. So that appears to be the right O-ring. I guess we're going to pressure test it when we're done to make sure it doesn't leak.
Now I'm going to show you some tricks on reinstalling this water pump so the gasket doesn't fall down.
If you want to keep this gasket from falling down, just put in 2 bolts. That'll help you line up your pump. The weep hole points up towards the top, which is kind of strange because most weep holes on most water pumps go down to the bottom. I don't know why they did that, but... So the torque procedure for this is 89 inch-pounds or 10 newton meters. Or do I got that backwards? Anyways, so you've got 3 procedures to this. You go 89 inch-pounds, 89 inch-pounds, and then 45-degree turn, which is going to be approximately from here to here. Not very much, just a quarter turn. A lot of times, if I don't have a torque wrench, I'll palm the end of the ratchet and turn it tight. I'm going to torque this one down properly. Okay, so I have them torqued down. So I'm going to take my ratchet, and I need to do my 45 degrees, and that's going to be approximately 130. Pretty much tight at that proper point. You almost get a feel for it once you're there. Now these bolts are also the same 6mm thread pitch. They're going to be 89 inch-pounds and 10 newton meters. So I kind of liked that torque procedure down there, so I did the same thing up here. I did that extra 45 degrees. It seems to feel pretty darn good to me. So now we can put this sucker back together. I try to wipe down everything that I possibly can, so if I do have some kind of leak for some weird reason, I'm able to see it. That's where Christian comes in. He is known here on the show as the ingenious Ginger Boy. Ginger Billy? Ingenious Ginger? Yes, Ingenious Ginger. He is known here on the show as the Ingenious Ginger from Clutch Society. I gotta give him props. He's working here. He's got little social media stuff that he does. So whenever you put this back together, try to remember to put this hose on before you put that on there, because no big deal. Just remove these 2 10mm bolts and then get it into its location. Bolts back in. Make sure you push the hose all the way up here. And you don't need to replace these bitch clamps with hose clamps. They work just fine. Okay, now you do not want to overfill this, okay? We're gonna fill it up to the full line, which is about halfway in here. How this system works is this is the highest hose. In some vehicles, you're gonna have problems getting the air out, but I think in this system, it's not gonna be a problem. But what you wanna do is you wanna push all that air out, and that's what this hose does. This bleeds the system. We might have to run it a little bit to fill up the gaps and stuff like that, but we wanna keep checking this for a day or two to make sure it doesn't drop down. And if it drops down, that just means that it filled up the portions of spots that it had air in. Also, if you have heat 1 second and you don't have heat another second, that's because your coolant is low and you have air pockets inside your heating system. So you need to burp it out correctly. And in this situation, it's pretty darn simple. Now, before we put this all back together, we're gonna pressure test it once more and see what happens.
Yeah, and it's still leaking down a little bit. And and it's not supposed to do that. So I gotta assume that part of my pressure tester here is defective, but I know after driving it for a while, we definitely got the leak fixed. Even without the tool working correctly, we just used common mechanical knowledge and sense to figure out and solve the problem. So now we're going to reinstall a serpentine belt, and I'm going to show you some tricks and tell you some things about reinstalling serpentine belts.
So yeah, our belt goes on just like that, and then we're gonna put it on the smooth pulley because it's the easiest one to insert it. Make sure that it goes on the back of your power steering pump, on your harmonic balancer down there. I know you can't see it, but you guys can look, and around your AC compressor. Okay, so that's the way that it's on there now. Now, something that's really stupid to me is this water pump. Man, it seemed like it'd be easy for that to not glide across there. It should have a lot of coverage on it. I'm gonna look it up and make sure that this is the correct belt routing.
I find this extremely fascinating that is as much as that serpentine belt goes along that water pump. But nevertheless, I'm going to leave it this way because it's the way that it works. Anytime you're working on something, you want the belt to contact the grooved pulleys as much as possible, so this does not make any sense to me. I suppose the most important thing, and this will even tell you how to know how to put on a belt without even looking it up, is that there's going to be the most coverage going around the harmonic balancer. That way, you can only put the belt on one way because obviously some pulleys are flat and obviously some pulleys are grooved.
So no matter what I do, I cannot get my tool not to leak. But I know the rest of it doesn't leak because it wasn't leaking out 80 pounds of pressure out of somewhere else. So I'm good to go. I'm going to start this thing up.
See if I can still smell coolant when it's running. It's been about a week. I've been driving it around. I put about 600 miles on it. And even though I couldn't find why my tool was leaking down, I don't have any drips. I don't have any coolant smells any longer. So I would say this is 100% successful.
My tool continues to leak. You'd almost think I had the drip of gonorrhea or something. Anyways, I know it's not leaking because I put in 80 pounds of pressure through this sucking thing. And there's nothing underneath it. So we're good to go, and we're going to keep our fingers crossed. Well, I'm here to tell you that alternator and that water pump job turned out absolutely great. I'm very happy with it. Everything's working properly. I'm not having an overheating. I've driven the thing at about, I don't know, 1,500 miles, at least 1,000 miles. I'm not sure. It's been a couple weeks, but turned out very well. And I'm out of the hospital, and my brain seems to be working okay today. So, if you enjoyed that video and you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing, clicking the notifications, sharing my videos. Give me them sweet old thumbs up. Remember, if you've got a question for me, I try to help everybody I possibly can. Just look me up on Clay's AC and Auto Repair on the Facebook Messenger. I'll do the best I can to answer your question. If I can't, I'll just tell you. Remember, don't be the next to them, be the absolute first of you, and if anyone else can do it, you can do it too, that I promise you. God bless, folks. Have the greatest of days.